I was gonna say that every now and then I like to go back and visit the history of G.I. Joe Real American Hero, but that'd be a lie because I am always revisiting the history of G.I. Joe Real American Hero in some form or another. It's usually with regards to the toy line. Every now and then I'll go back and talk about a favorite episode of the cartoon or something like that. And recently, with the issuance of Skybound's 4-volume compendium of the original Marvel run with 155 issues plus special missions plus other bonus features in there, it kind of got me in the mood to talk about the comics and kind of just going through the channels I've heard of in the past and various blogs and everything. I thought to myself, I'd like to bring someone on who might know the comics more than a little better than I do. And very, very quickly, I shortened my list to just a couple of people, and I zoned in right on the Talking Joe podcast and decided to bring a gentleman. You might know him, you might not, but I'd like to introduce him anyway. From the Talking Joe podcast, the owner of Hub Comics, and he also runs a Real American G.I. Joe blog. We got Tim Finn.
Hello, Ken. Hello, listeners and viewers.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me on this. I know we were talking a little bit backstage before, and you know how you've been not only familiar with the comic, but you and your podcast partner, Mark, pretty much go through this stuff weekly, right?
Yes, we record every week, and he posts new episodes on Thursdays.
Yeah, I was just listening to your sort of like guide, yours and his guide to the comics. And like, I didn't get all the way through it because it's kind of a longer episode, but I did get past like where you were talking about Devil's Due and all that, which is kind of the run that I fell into a weird situation where like I was a bit too young for the original run. And by the time I was old enough to really start reading the comics, there were so many issues in, it was hard to like to just kind of jump into the middle. And then I was already an adult when the Devil's Due run came out. That kind of became my thing. So I was all about Kamakura and Zanya and those. I thought I should go back and have a look at those older issues that I did not get a fair sampling of. And then, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Skybound stuff really got me hooked. And I'm just like, I gotta reconnect or connect, depending how you want to put it, with Tim Finn and see his thoughts on some of this stuff. So
I have many thoughts on this stuff.
Oh, I know you do. And like we were talking backstage, like you and I have met, but it was for something like 10 seconds at Joe Fest 2024.
Yes, folks, if you are enjoying our easy rapport, Ken and I have effectively never spoken before. And we certainly haven't done a video or a podcast episode together.
Yes. So I think it was just you walked by the Delta 17 booth. We had a very quick, I don't even know if we had a handshake, a high five, a fist bump, or a wave. I don't even know what it was. And then you featured it in the blog.
Can you move to the left? I have to take a photo of your figures without a person behind them. And then
there we go.
Knelt down behind them.
And then I moved down instead, and I ended up in the photo. But as I was mentioning earlier, and I've kind of got a bit of a slideshow ready here, this is your podcast partner, Mark, with you, Talking Joe Comics on YouTube.
Yeah, so Talking Joe existed before I joined 4 years ago. Gosh, and it had already covered the entire Marvel run, and I think, up until then, it was current with the continued A Real American Hero run at IDW, and there was the co-host left and another co-host left, and it was just Mark. And he had me on as a guest to talk about the book that I'm writing. And I talked for so long, he cut it into 2 episodes. And then he said, do you want to be the new co-host? And we'll just talk about new issues of IDW A-Raw as they come out. And this was starting with 276. And, wow. And I said, yes. And then immediately he said, since this is only monthly, why don't we also start back and go through the Devil's Due run? And so for that, we had a co-host, Jay Cordray. So for those episodes, it's 3 of us. And then Jay left after 2 years of those sort of odd numbered episodes. And it's been Mark and I both for the rest of the IDW Real American Hero run, the continuation of it at Skybound. We did the rest of Devil's Due with the spinoffs, and then Mark's been really great about getting interviews with writers and artists and editors from the current Skybound run. That's both Real American Hero and the Energon universe. We've also had 2 or 3 Hasbro people on the show to talk about toys and G.I. Joe in general, even though we are a comics podcast. And then we've had some really fun interviews with Marvel folks like Jim Shooter, who was editor-in-chief, or Nel Yomtov, who was head of licensing and lettered some G.I. Joe Special Missions issues, and also lettered every issue of Transformers, but was there at that very first meeting between Marvel and Hasbro in 1981. And so the podcast is it's a big chunk of my week. But I like to tell people that Mark does all the work and I just show up and talk.
Well, I'm noticing a bit of a trend. Like, you show up as a guest and all of a sudden you're there permanently. You and I didn't really get to talk, and all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, but this guy has good insights. I'm going to ask him on as a guest anyway, and if I piss him off, so be it. I got to stop on camera. Just kidding.
Well,
I don't intend to piss you off today.
I have a Post-it right here that I'm ready to slide right in front of my camera if I need to leave the show in a huff, since there's no dramatic image of me up on stage like throwing down the award statuette at the awards ceremony and saying, I can't do this anymore, Ken. I won't be on your show.
Okay, so we're not fully prepped for that part. All right. And you've also got a blog, which I actually recently read, not only your DFW reports, but also your last year's Assembly Required and the previous Joe Fests that you went through. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm writing a book. And for many years, the working title was A Real American Book. That may not be the final title. But that's the URL, arealamericanbook.com. And I also post reminders about it on Instagram. So that's my Instagram. And for many years, this was a place for me to post images that wouldn't fit in my book, because I have art and prototypes and memos and photos from the making of G.I. Joe toys, comics, and animation. And very early on, I was posting every week or two, and I certainly don't have the time to do that now. And then I started attending conventions, and I would write up these long convention reports. And so now I sort of ping pong between the occasional very, very short blog post on, 1 or 2 items like a model sheet or a prototype or a memo, or these much longer reports on a whole weekend at a G.I. Joe convention. And those I'm writing for me, but also because I feel like as a historian, and I do think of myself as a historian because I have conducted 293 interviews for my G.I. Joe history book. And I've written 21 chapters, and my editors and I are just editing right now. I want people who didn't go to those conventions to be able to get a taste of them. And it's certainly through my lens, because I'm going to certain panels and missing others. I know certain people and I don't know other people. I might get there on the Friday or the Thursday. But I feel like, other people can take a ton of photos. Other people can take a bunch of video or live stream panels, but I want it through the filter of a journalist or a reporter who's sort of writing down what happened and what it felt like. And as I've gone to more and more of these, I see the same people over and over in a good way, and I've made friends. And so there's a lot of familiarity at conventions now.
Every time I saw you at the 2025 convention, you had your head down at a keyboard sitting at one of the tables. So it was quite
yeah. So when I'm at conventions, I take notes of what's happening by texting my wife. And I have a sample chapter of my book fully laid out. And if I'm carrying my laptop, that means I'm ready to show someone. And it might be a friend who hasn't seen it. It might be a friendly, generous person who lent me something for the book, right? Like a rare item, or who sold me something. Okay. So.
And you have gone to the conventions all the way back to the JoeCon days, correct?
Yeah. Was my first one 2010 or 2011?
Wow.
Yeah, but I have a friend who was telling me about the conventions in 2004 and 2005, and I was attending BotCon. I went to the first one in '94.
Wow.
I believe I was the youngest pre-registrant
Wow.
at BotCon '94. There were 175 pre-registrants, and I think it's 25 or 50 walk-ins. It was a tiny show, but it was amazing. So I went to BotCon from '94 to like '05, including the OTFCC shows. There were the 2 years.
Yep.
There were two shows because there was that
Yep.
split.
Yep.
So during that time, I was going to conventions, just the other one, and I was sort of aware of Brian Savage as a GI Joe, convention and club guy because of the Transformers sort of paperwork crossover. But those conventions in the early 2000s to me felt like 70% or 80% 12-inch GI Joe from the 60s and 70s, and collectors who wanted that and were selling that, and much less about 3 3/4 inch. And right. that wasn't interesting to me. And then as I got further into my book, this same friend said, you have to go to these conventions. There are people to talk to. And, it's not just about buying stuff. It's about making, you might say, connections.
Woohoo! Woohoo! I love it. Yeah, I went to BotCon in 2010 as well, and I was quite overwhelmed at how just like this huge conglomeration of Transformer people. So when I went to Joe Fest for the first time in 2023, it was like, this is more of the same, except I'm older, wiser, and can take it in a little bit more. So yes. And on top of everything we have already said, you also own a comic shop.
I own and operate a comic book store, Hub Comics. It's in Somerville, Massachusetts. Somerville borders Cambridge and Boston. We're 5 subway stops out of Boston. I have a manager and a couple of great employees who open the store and run the register. I do ordering for the store. I do the weekly email. I organize our events. I go in 3 to 6 days a week, and I move stuff around, and I will, hop on the register and interact with customers. And sort of the main thing we do is answer questions and give people recommendations. And I really enjoy that, and my employees enjoy that, and that's something we're known for. And this isn't just the like old thing of like, should I order my books online? Like, no, go to a store where you can browse and ask questions. If you think of like your local library or bookstore, if you live in a city or a town, if you live in a city with one bar, right? That place is really, or one cafe, that place is so valuable.
Yes.
Because people go there for a sense of community and a place to hang out. And yes. I think books are amazing, and I want to have a beautiful, well-stocked, and I'm going to use the C word, even though it's overused, curated bookstore. And so I really enjoy customers coming in who know a lot about comics and are looking for the next thing. I read this. What do you have that's like it? Or haven't read comics, but I heard I should read Watchmen. Like, well, you can start with Watchmen. You might want to start with this or that. Or I'm here to buy a gift. Like, oh, well, what is this person like?
Well, I haven't read Batman stuff since the new 52 Snyder run, so I think I might hit you up for some recommendations. So
I can do that.
It's been a while. I heard that the Failsafe arc is pretty good with Gordon and all that. So yeah, you're keeping tight-lipped on.
No. I'm trying to remember. I don't think Failsafe shows up in the first arc by Zdarsky. I think Failsafe shows up in the second one. Okay. So you might technically be referring to a volume 2, in which case I'd say just start at the beginning of Zdarsky. Okay. But it's been a while since I read that, so I'd have to check a catalog.
Okay, nope, fair enough. And so when I initially asked you to come on, and now that we've kind of done the introduction and everything, I'm gonna put all these links in the description below. I know for the Talking Joe link, I put that at the top, and then you also have that for the Real American blog at the top. But I'll put all the links in the description below. I'll Google Hub Comics so that people know where to find it in Massachusetts.
We have folks. If you're missing those IDW Real American Hero issues by Hama, we have them. The ones that are hard to find on eBay, we have them.
Okie doke. So there you go. All right. And initially, when I asked you to come on, we were going to talk about a bit about some of the Marvel comic issues, some of your favorite memories. What I really liked is that you didn't go with something obvious. You didn't pick Silent Interlude. You didn't pick the first appearance of Joe Colton, which I would have done. You went with something a little bit more, something you could talk with a level of insight that we don't always hear. And I like the fact that you started with issue 2, which is the appearance of Quinn the Tracker, right? Specifically, you wanted to talk about how the issue evolves, not only meeting Quinn, but meeting him as a mercenary. And then at the end, he sort of has it out with the Russians who hired him, I think is where you wanted to go with that.
The first couple issues of G.I. Joe are fascinating because we are so used to the canon and the established characters, like every year there's going to be a new wave of merchandising, like shoes or bag clips or, like a new scale of action figure. And it's going to be those 10 or 15 characters that we all know so well: Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Cobra Commander, Duke, Scarlet. At the beginning, there were no expectations except that Larry Hama would use the 13 Joes and the 3 Cobras, right? And
right.
He and Trimpe whip up the Baroness. And I know there's a little disagreement about, who created the Baroness. Is it Hama and Trimpe? Is it Ron Rudat? I'm more on the Hama side based on sort of timelines, but I think there's a good argument to be made that Rudat did. But, in the very second issue, you have this major NPC, this non-player character, right? This is not a character who had a toy. This is not a character who is on either team. And he's this really unknown quantity. And I know we're talking about story, but I want to take a step back again and just talk about publishing. Herb Trimpe didn't draw issue 2, right? Isn't it Don Perlin?
You know what? Let me. I don't know if I have it here.
I
don't think it says at the beginning. Yeah, that's actually a good question. When I took these screenshots, I just assumed it was Herb. Might be able to open it here on the side and actually get it because it'll be near the start of my compendium.
It's Don Perlin.
Okay, perfect. I was about to open my digital copy to have a look. So,
okay,
official digital copy, I should say. I did not pirate these.
So, like nowadays, you would never have a comic. I mean, comics are made a little differently now. Marvel in the early 80s was like, the trains have to run on time. That's a Jim Shooterism. And, they weren't any version of sort of, quote, written for the trade, written as story arcs for a graphic novel, whether it's 5 issues or 6 issues or 12 issues or, there were these ongoing monthly sort of soap operas. And you would never have an issue 2 now, not drawn by the series regular artist, who then comes back for issue 3. And yet, as a kid, when I was discovering these issues, the art in issue 1 looks enough like the art in issue 2 that it's all just early G.I. Joe to me that sort of predates me getting into comics. I got these as back issues. You're showing the final 3 panels right now, and I will say I'm a tiny bit disappointed that the final panel is a comp, a slight blow up of the second to last panel. Right? It's that the art didn't get drawn again. It's a copy, but that's okay. That's okay. Hama has paraphrased Wally Wood talking about. I always get this wrong, but it's like never invent what you can swipe, never swipe what you can't trace, never trace what you can't steal, something like that. So if an artist wants to reuse a piece of art, it's not always my favorite, but drawing comics is hard and you're always behind schedule, right?
Yeah.
So, this final bit of narration from Quinn has stayed with me. This is one of the great endings for me.
Yes.
a comic book story, of a single issue 22-page comic, that the Joes are going to have their justice, maybe not quite
Yes.
their revenge. And when did you read issue 2, Ken?
I flipped through it as a kid way back in the day, but did not absorb it until earlier this year. So for those who maybe haven't read it, because Quinn gets hired as a mercenary, and then he eventually has a disagreement with the Russians who hired him, he basically fulfills his contract and basically leaves them for the Joes. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm sure Tim's got more insight on that, and that's where these last few panels kind of show the justice that the Joes are about to extract, so to speak. So,
and so I read issue 2 in 89 or 90, right? So I got into the comics. My first issue is issue 90 in the summer of 1989. So I'd missed a whole bunch. And issue 90 has a bunch of footnotes that refer to other issues. You see Serpentor's corpse, which blew my mind. And we're going to get to issue 90 maybe later in the slideshow. But but one of the earliest comics my brother and I got were yearbook 3 and maybe 4, and those had those summaries of the previous year. And so between the footnotes and these text summaries with some reprinted panels, and then those cover galleries in the yearbooks, we had this weird guide towards sort of what issues we might try and get first, even though we were sort of figuring we would get them all. But, you know, we missed 89 issues. This isn't going to be cheap or fast, right? There are no graphic novel reprints of any of these issues at that point. So my comparison was the cartoon. And I love the cartoon, and I could talk a lot about the cartoon. And there is no episode of the cartoon that ends on a note like this in terms of actual plot, much less character motivation, right? That these Joes are all basically scowling. I mean, it's a look of determination, and I hesitate to use the word revenge. I'm thinking justice, but there's, some episodes end with, there's that Thundercats thing where someone cracks a joke and they all laugh and the camera pans back. And G.I. Joe didn't really do that, but you sort of think of the cartoon as lighter.
Like Optimus goes, roll out, and then they end the episode as they ride off into the sunset, kind of a thing. Right.
And this is in a harsh environment, I mean, Panic at the North Pole, like all the copy on the front cover, it's that sweet spot of sort of pulpy, enticing, dramatic, captions, narration, tease, that feels like, let me say, older school comics, right? You sort of never get copy like this on covers anymore.
No.
But it also, and it's this very Marvel, Stan Lee 60s, huckster thing that's happening. And G.I. Joe comics don't do this anymore. Although I will say, issue 321, which is about to come out, does have a burst on the bottom, which says, a new silent interlude, 300 issues in the making, which is to say, hey, everyone,
it's 321.
It's 321. When there's a 21, we're supposed to do a wordless issue, right? Although that's never been a rule. And as for your comment about, me not picking silent interlude, I will note, folks, if you want to hear me talk about silent interlude, we've done like 6 episodes about it on Talking Joe. One where we look at all the original artwork, one where we review the anniversary special over 3 parts where every page was redrawn, etc.
Well, what I really liked about this is a lot of people, when we talk about comic memories, a lot of people would just say first appearance of Quinn. They wouldn't necessarily talk about the execution of how he fulfills his contract, walks away, and lets the Joes have their day in court as judge, jury, executioner. And I really like that insight. Remember what I said to you when you gave me your list of things you wanted to talk about? I said, I think I asked the right guy. You know what I mean? I didn't get, because I would have gone first appearance of Quinn, silent interlude, first appearance of Colton, and issue 155. That's what I would have said. right?
Folks, what Ken is referring to is he said, what are some of your favorite stories? And I didn't say issue 2, I said the last page of issue 2.
Exactly.
So in a few cases, I was being pretty specific here because I love
Yes.
issue 2. And I will say issue 2 and Special Missions 1 and 2 are 3 comics that I have occasionally given to people who've never read G.I. Joe comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said, you don't have to know anything. This is just a really good short story. This is just a good single issue, action comic with stakes.
And it reads that way. Like this could be the ending of a movie in modern time. That's how well this issue holds up. So
yeah, it holds up. So it's not dated, and it's easy to frown at the later issues of G.I. Joe with lots of ninja stuff or lots of neon colors, and that's driven.
Yeah.
And that's driven by the toys, right? Like Larry Hama didn't say more colors, right? That's Hasbro marketing because Hasbro had to compete with Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. But I love the Wildman issues with ninjas and bright colors. I wouldn't just give any one of those issues to someone who's never read G.I. Joe and said, trust me, this might make you a fan. But issue 2, oh yes.
Absolutely. And another one you chose, you mentioned issue 6. And what's key about issue 6 is the October Guard show up in this one. I believe it's their first appearance.
Yes.
And again, just like with issue 2, you didn't say, oh, let's talk about issue 6. You said, let's talk about the ending of issue 6.
Yeah. This might be hitting a somewhat similar note, and there's plenty to talk about issues 6 and 7, like the fact that they were intended to be issues 2 and 3. So the Joes are captured, and Cobra Commander walks up and says, you may line up all the prisoners by the ravine. And then the final panel is a close-up on him, and you see them reflected in his battle mask, and he continues, and kill them. And Stalker is taking a step forward with his fist forward, and Flash is sort of holding him back with his hand on his shoulder and his hand on his arm. And again, I'd already read 10 or 20 issues of G.I. Joe by this point. It's 89 or 90. I've been reading comics for half a year. I get a second print of this, or the Tales of reprint. And I know these characters are still alive. And I know that you can't really kill characters, main Joe characters in G.I. Joe. And this ending really chilled me when I read it, because this is such a vicious Cobra Commander, and he's not wasting any time. And so the sort of similar note here is that someone is being, in this case, cruel, right? The ending of issue 2 is, I would say, tough, maybe not quite cruel. But I remember thinking, as I read this final page, and back then it took me longer to read comics, and I'd usually read them like 3 times the first week I got them, because there was so much to take in, and I was a new comics reader, and now I can read a lot faster, and I'm so grumpy and jaded, and there's too many comics to read. I got to read them fast. But I get to this final panel, and I thought, oh no, are they gonna line up the Joes and shoot them? Like, are the Joes not going to get? Are they not going to get out of this? How are they going to get out of this? And somewhere in the pile, I think we'd ordered 6 and 7, mail order, and or maybe it came a month later from a subsequent mail order. But so the thing that I want to point out here, that's sort of a favorite of mine, is again, Hama writes a really compelling. I think Trimpe's plotting here, right? So the dialogue is Hama, but there's a really compelling cliffhanger. And it's nothing like the cartoon has cliffhangers like this, but you don't take it seriously, right? It's like,
it's Serpentor saying, "This I command," and then you jump to part 5 of, that 5-part Arise Serpentor Arise. Usually that's the cliffhanger.
The Joes are absolutely getting out of this if this is the ending of an act or an episode of the cartoon. Even though I knew the Joes were going to get out of this in the comic, I wasn't sure the Joes were going to get out of this in the comic.
Yeah. Right, because they will clone and bring people back to life in Marvel Comics. So you're just like, okay, so is the Stalker that I know in later issues the same Stalker? Or did they pull a Jean Grey on him? You know what I mean? You're probably wondering things like that, I'm guessing.
I mean, okay, so at that point, I was reading issue 90, 91, 92. So no Joe or Cobra had been brought back from the dead. Serpentor hadn't been brought back from the dead. Mindbender, Cobra Commander was just dead, right? This was like 7 months away, 8 months away. And so, and I hadn't read any X-Men comics. So this idea that death is not permanent in comics was not an idea that I had in mind.
Fair enough. I had an older cousin tell me about that before. Like when I was reading comics in the 90s, he'd be like, well, this person's died like 4 times and came back. So that's why I assumed you went through the same thing. But hey, I guess not.
Although, I guess to be fair, Optimus Prime had died in the movie in '86, and he came back just a few months later in the show because the producers got so much mail and phone calls.
Yep.
And they were really concerned, and they had miscalculated, right? This had been this very smart, maybe not pessimistic, but just it was a marketing decision, right? That toy has been retired. We're going to introduce the new toy. Let's off the hero, and everyone will buy the new toy. But it turns out, folks, so many kids, me included, really loved that character and were stunned.
He's almost more precious to us because he died. You know what I mean? Like I will, like one of my holy grails became that Diaclone battle convoy. Like you can maybe see the Microman version of Blaster right here in the back because he got taken away from us. And it made me want to collect him more as an adult. It made me have to get Power Master Optimus Prime as a kid. But I digress into Transformers. We might have a bit of a Transformers talk later on.
We can talk about it. We can talk about it.
Yeah,
I have a lot to say about Transformers.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Which means
Ken, are you a particular October Guard fan? Do these 2 issues hold any more significance for you?
Well, I mean, given that Delta 17 is currently working on a Hind helicopter, and yes, I did go out of my way to get some of those 2000s October Guard figures. Some of my favorite figures in the 90s are characters like Red Star. I did get a Big Bear growing up as a kid, so I do like the October Guard. But
I remember when Captain Kremov showed up in the Deke episodes, and I thought, okay, it sort of gets half credit from me.
Yeah, I get that.
So Trimpe and Tom DeFalco had written and drawn a story that had appeared in a black and white Marvel magazine a few months earlier that had this team called Pravda Patrol, and it was black and white, and they owned it. And when Trimpe's plotting this issue, he draws the Pravda Patrol, and it gets lettered and inked. And someone realizes in the Hasbro Marvel chain that Marvel can't publish this story with G.I. Joe characters that Hasbro owns, and also some creator-owned characters that Trimpe and DeFalco. And DeFalco's the editor for the first 7 months of Real American Hero. So these 2 issues get bumped, and someone, I don't know who, I don't think it's Trimpe, redraws the faces on all the October Guard characters in this issue, and they get renamed. And you can Google it; it's easy to find. An early photocopy of the uncorrected pages is out there, and you can do a side-by-side comparison. And then if you feel like you really know Herb Trimpe's art, I feel like if you look at the new faces, they don't quite look like how he draws faces, but they look fine. And so these were going to be issues 3, 2, and 3.
Well, you get used to Trimpe very quickly if you start reading the compendiums from Skybound, and so we jump from issue 6. Now we get into we do a bit of a time jump by a few years here, and we talk about the Fred 7 days of G.I. Joe. Now this was an issue I did get as a kid, kind of as a random impulse buy at a newsstand. I did not understand the whole Fred 7 Cobra Commander thing. So when you selected, again, you don't just pick an issue, you pick a conversation from that issue. I remember having this cover as a kid, and you specifically pointed to the unmasking of Cobra Commander behind the scenes, because Baroness knows what he's supposed to look like.
Yeah. So the fact that we jump from issue 6 to 64, I love all the issues between. I don't know how many suggestions for issues or pages was too many. So when I sort of went off the cuff and gave you 8 or 9 suggestions, or 6 or 7, but we can talk about issue 22. We can talk about issue 45. This issue is striking to me. First of all, I own this page, so it's fun to talk about because I just have the original artwork.
Oh yeah,
and it's amazing. Ron Wagner, this is an early issue from him, and he's great. And I feel like Rod Wiggum and Ron Wagner, I'm generalizing and oversimplifying here. I feel like many people who were reading the comic in the 80s and 90s, this is what they want G.I. Joe to look like. They want G.I. Joe to look like these two artists, and maybe Trimpe, maybe Mark Bright, like not Tony Salmon's stuff. I think his stuff is brilliant, but it's weird. When you get to Wildman, I love Wildman stuff. And he'd already drawn Transformers, so like seal of approval, right? But it's much cartoonier. Like Phil Gozier, I think we're talking about one of his issues later in the slideshow. Rod Wagner's sort of physiques and faces. He went to the Joe Kubert School. He wanted to draw war comics. In 1986 and 1987, there are no war comics. I think maybe Sergeant Rock was still sort of limping along as a reprint book. I think it ends right around then. Every issue has new covers, but no one's making war comics. And Wagner has some Joe Kubert in him, right? Because third year at the Joe Kubert School, Joe Kubert was your teacher. And Wagner has such a handle on anatomy and these, crazy vehicles. And if this page that we're looking at looks clean and reminds you a little bit of the cartoon, right? It doesn't have sort of like Herb Trimpe's squinty eyes. It doesn't have, like later artists sort of bigger or cartoony eyes. This issue particularly stands out because Russ Heath inked it. And that's crazy, right? Because Russ Heath had drawn an issue 24? 22? No, 22's got Destro with the Rattler. Duke is tackling Storm Shadow with Roadblock behind him, and Cobra Commander is on the clock. Okay, so Russ Heath had drawn most of the character model sheets for the animated series. The entire look, also vehicles, the entire look of the cartoon, right, starting in 1983 with the Mass Device episodes, is Russ Heath, who had been a comics artist drawing war comics for DC. And also he did a really famous story in Blazing Combat, which was not DC. And the producers at the animation studio in New York specifically picked him because he had drawn war comics, right? Or the producers in LA and New York, right, at the animation studios. And okay, so you think of I'm going to use the S word, synergy, right? You think of like the synergy. I think of Cops, and the toys are so exaggerated, right? And I can see Bart Sears' designs, right? I can see those lips and cheekbones and brows and wide set eyes and like the exaggeration of someone like Big Boss.
Yes.
I can see it. And even though Sears didn't draw the package art, right? The artist who did, I think it's Richard Marsedge, who did all of them or most of them or some of them. He's looking at Bart Sears drawings, right? And then you look at the animated series, and the designers of the animated series are looking at the toys. And even though Bart Sears did not work on the cartoon, it's through his filter, right?
Yeah,
And
like
then you
it's
look at the comic book and he did some covers, right? And so
right.
it's really Cops is a bit of a piece. Toy, comic, cartoon, they all kind of look alike, right? G.I.
Yeah,
Joe, you have some of that, but less of that. And you have this little bit of convergence where Russ Heath does all this work on the cartoon, both the Sunbow episodes and also some of the Deke episodes.
right.
He draws an issue. He draws one cover for Marvel Age with Joe's on it.
Steers was a busy guy. Yeah.
And then he inks, and then Heath inks this issue, and Wagner was a really big fan. Okay, so that's the sort of context. Then the writing on this scene, right? How often in a G.I. Joe comic do you get a wordless panel like this, right? I mean, certainly we have occasionally wordless issues,
Well,
but this beat where, I mean, look at Fred's face.
yes.
He's embarrassed and a little
Yes.
ashamed. Like he knows he's in trouble. He's been caught.
Yes.
But
Red-handed, and she knows what he looks like. Yeah. And Tim, I gotta grab something off the stove, so I'm gonna let you because this is lunchtime for me after this.
Sure.
You just talked. You just talked through this scene. I'll be back in like literally about less than a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah, please, because this is an important scene in the comic. So
sure. So Fred knows he's been caught, and now the question is she going to turn him in? Is she going to shoot him? Right? Because he in the accessory shot Cobra Commander 6, 7 issues earlier. Is she going to yell at him? And I love that it just unravels, right? She says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I thought I could pull off the impersonation," right? And I've made this point on Talking Joe a couple times, something that I can't do, right? I write history, I write nonfiction. I'm not really a fiction writer. I'm always impressed when writers can keep track of which characters in a story know what, right? Like if it's a mystery, which of the characters knows about, the red herring or who the suspect is. And so, Hama's keeping track of all this stuff. Okay, the Baroness knows what Cobra Commander looks like. Fred doesn't know. Who else knows? So, sometimes people's favorite moment in a G.I. Joe comic is something that's very action related, or sometimes it's a moment of sort of quiet honor or heroism. Maybe it involves Snake Eyes being particularly selfless, and he has been many times. This page really, again, I own the art, so I'm sort of pre-programmed to like this page. But
as a kid, I did not, when I read this issue, I did not really understand what was going on, right? And then as a kid, the first Cobra Commander I got was this battle armor helmeted version, silver helmeted version of him. And then, of course, in the Deke series later on, he shows up as this version. So I didn't realize till later why people were calling him Fred. You know what I mean? And I'm not sure if you got all your thoughts in on this panel yet, so stop me if I jump too far ahead. But they also in the last panel / last page here, they do talk a little bit about the context of Billy, and it was sort of like through meeting Cobra Commander's son Billy that he sort of like semi-retires or temporarily retires as Cobra Commander during that time. Right.
I also love in this panel you've got on screen now that second footnote, right? Describes the dialogue as an outright lie. And Larry Hama didn't invent that. That might be the editor. Is this Bob Harris or Bobby Chase? I think this is Bob Harris. This might be Hama. This might be the editor. But I love this idea that in a really, with a light touch, this footnote is clarifying something. Because if you don't know the context, if this is your first or your third issue, the creative team wants to keep you sort of current and not led astray. And at the same time, there's this tension to this scene because Baroness and Fred are having this talk while there are all these, Serpentor and all these soldiers are back there and his tanks, and they're doing this talk on one of these Aspids, one of these amazing Cobra sort of cargo helicopters, right? Which was invented for the comic and is now kind of canon. So So those are the 17 reasons why I love that page and this issue.
Well, I definitely like this. This one definitely brought back memories for me, and not many issues do when it comes to the run. One of the ones that doesn't is I never read this one as a kid, and I was a little surprised you chose this one, but pleasantly surprised because again, you didn't just say I picked the issue where the Saw Viper gunned everybody down. You know what I mean? You picked the first appearance of Python Patrol, and you went to a specific slide about the conquest blowing things up.
So it's all about Tony Salmon's design. So he draws, what is it, like 4 issues of G.I. Joe, a couple fill-ins, plus that backup story in Yearbook 4. And around then he had drawn Dakota North, which was this 5-issue miniseries for Marvel where Larry Hama was the editor. And she's a private eye, but she's involved in the world of fashion. And the person who wrote it had come from TV and was not a comics writer. And this is a reminder to me that Hama is doing things in comics that not a lot of other people are doing, right? Like, I don't think anyone in 1989 is pitching to Marvel things like these non-superhero things like, okay, no superheroes. It's a private eye, right? There's a missing person. And I forget if she's watching over her like kid brother or her kid cousin or someone's kid brother, but there's sort of a sidekick. Okay, so that's early work by Tony Salmons. He'd done a little bit of New Universe. He did a Web of Spider-Man annual. So he does a couple issues of G.I. Joe. And I get the sense that people don't love these issues. Some of it is made more consistent because Randy Emberlin is sort of the series inker by this point. He's inked like the previous artist. He's going to ink the Mark Bright run. So he's inking these fill-ins. Or maybe it's Fred Fredericks, who is like in the orbit. He ended up inking Nth Man and had inked some earlier issues. But so the slide we're looking at is 2 of the 3 panels or 2 of the 4 panels. And there's another panel on this page. Salmons has such a strong sense of design and shape, and we may not get the full picture, I guess literally, since because comics are vertical and this video screen is horizontal. But there's a panel, I think, at the top of the page with the conquest zooming through the air, and the sort of trio of shapes that Salmons has, this like jet on the top, and then these like 3 bursts on the 3 tanks on this next panel, and then these 3 Cobra agents, this sort of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 of it. Salmon's drawings are a little weird. Some of his faces are kind of, I don't know what the word is, like squinched or squinty. Like the first page of issue 91 is like ugly, but I think it's supposed to be Zartan in the alley. But at the same time, it's so cool that Python Patrol gets this big introduction, but I'd already seen Operation Dragonfire, which gives them a bigger introduction. And I was a little disappointed with the sort of the comparison here. And now I'm just talking about toys. Python Patrol's colors, right? Python Patrol's color scheme is so gorgeous. And I love looking at just some of those figures, all those figures, the vehicles lined up in a pile. Any combination, and some of them as they've shown up in classified, I get this little buzz inside, and the color and printing abilities of cheap comics in 1989 was not going to do Python Patrol justice. So I was excited that they showed up, but then sort of disappointed by the art and color in the issue. And then can you go back to the cover? Yep. Right. This feels like some kind of miscommunication because there is no one from Python Patrol on this cover. And yet the cover is promising Python Patrol. And I kind of feel like what the image wants to be is, Copperhead and a Televiper and whatever, Right. Also, this cover has a coloring mistake that has always bothered me. And it's slightly cropped out here, but it's on the bottom. So it's two coloring mistakes. Behind Destro is Battle Armor Cobra Commander. So he sort of looks like Darklon here, right? That's a dark blue, but that should be white or silver or like white with light blue.
If you told me it was Darklon, that's why I would have believed it was.
Right, but right. Darklon doesn't have a Cobra symbol on his forehead. And then
exactly.
Behind him, the sort of breathing tube for Cobra Commander is colored such that it sort of like doesn't look like it's connected to this helmet. It looks like it sort of belongs to the person behind him. Anyway, I've always been disappointed.
It's a pet peeve at this point, right?
Yeah, so, yeah. But you know, it's still an exciting issue, right? In terms of action.
It is. I thumbed through it again when you mentioned it. I'm like, damn, you know, like I kind of glossed over this one when I was reading the run because I was kind of all 155 issues plus special missions plus Order of Battle plus Transformer crossover all plunked into my lap at once, that I kind of read this one and kind of glossed over it until you mentioned it. You know, like I didn't realize the parallelism of the three tanks and you got three Cobra agents at the bottom until you mentioned it. Right.
It's also fun with I think this is Rick Parker lettering, right? This is very evocative, cartoony, fill letters of room, womp, womp, womp. Yep. This is, I have said before that Rick Parker is my favorite letterer in comics, and it's because of G.I. Joe and how sort of warm and friendly his Amazing Spider-Man lettering is. And this page, any of his pages is an example of it, but like
awesome.
I like fun sound effects, and when comics got serious and for grown-ups and they couldn't have sound effects, like rat-tat-tat and sock and blam, because that's for kids, or it sort of looks
the old Batman, Adam West, Burt Ward days.
Well, not even that. Like it happens in the late 80s because of things like Killing Joke and Watchmen and the Batman movie adaptation, right? It's like these things have to look sort of fancy and like elevated, and sound effects in comics can look distracting or sort of kid, but it's a tool in your toolkit, and it's sort of like watching a movie with no sound effects, with like music and dialogue, or maybe just dialogue, right? Like, why would you limit yourself and take one tool out of your toolkit, right? Like, you can build up so much atmosphere or suspense. You can withhold information. You can tease information. Think of if you got a page turn in a comic, and you've got like clop, 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 and someone has their hands to their ear, right? And it's raining outside, right? Like, oh, someone's walking towards the door. If you don't do sound effects, either you don't anticipate that, or you're going to have to do it with clunky dialogue, like someone's approaching.
It's just that I think at some point writing and editing evolved to a point where they associated those kinds of sound effects with parody and comedy more than it did seriousness. I think that's what makes sense in my head, right? So, yeah. Good insights. Like, this is why you're here, right? Like, you're giving me a lot of stuff I don't expect. You have favorite letterers, you're comparing art styles, you're remembering who drew what specifically. Like, there's a lot in here that you're kind of educating me on. So I almost don't even need to be on camera. I just flip through a slide and hey, go for 10 minutes.
Folks, if you like Rick Parker's lettering, I highly recommend his autobiographical graphic novel Drafted, which came out a year ago. It's about him joining the army while Vietnam is happening, and it's thoughtful and fascinating. And I went to a talk he gave, and I got to see original art, and then we had him at my store, and he gave a talk, and he signed books.
Wow.
And go buy that hardcover. It's published by Abrams. It's a real thing.
Okie doke. I never would have guessed. So thank you again. Another thing that you wanted to point out, say I see the excitement, right? And one of the things that I don't always hear people talk about is Road Pig's fascination for Zorana, right? Here's issue number 90. And I kind of saw you getting excited there. One of the panels you pointed out to me as a talking point, and this is where I decided to start cropping pages side by side instead of cutting them off, because I realized that might affect your commentary. So this one I did side by side. I decided to get smart. And here's the confrontation between the Dreadnoks trying to access a meeting with Destro, Cobra Commander, Baroness, and a few others. The Iron Grenadiers are standing in their way.
That panel where the Iron Grenadiers drew their swords. So this is the first comic book I ever bought. And the show was in reruns, right? So the show was effectively over, but the toy was still coming out. And I was reading newspaper comics, but not comic books. And I saw this, and the cover, if you can go back a slide.
Absolutely.
I didn't quite know who the guys not in costume were, but I certainly knew who Road Pig was. I think I sort of guessed it was Rock and Roll. But Road Pig's got his crazy weapon. He's big, like he should be. All right, so this cover is penciled by Mark Bright, and it's inked by, I think, Bob McLeod. And this is not the strongest G.I. Joe cover, right? Mark Bright was a good cover artist and occasionally a great cover artist. This is an okay cover. But it ends up being sort of pulpy and lurid because of the bright yellow logo, right? And this is something that G.I. Joe comics, Real American Hero comics aren't doing anymore. The Energon Universe G.I. Joe logo at Skybound gets to change color. The Real American Hero logo does not. It's white letters, black outline, red, white, and blue stripe. But here, Marvel would change the colors as needed. And this yellow just really screams, right? Like,
yes.
Warning. And there's this giant red arrow on the wall, lettered in perspective, and it says brainwave scanner chamber. And I didn't know what I was looking at, except I loved G.I. Joe. I wanted more stories, right? The show was over, right? I didn't know that more Deke episodes were about to show up. I didn't know I was about to be disappointed by new episodes of G.I. Joe. Although I love Dragonfire, right? And I was immediately worried about these two Joes. Like, okay, whatever the brainwave scanner is, that's bad news. And Road Pig is bad news. Yes. Okay, so I'm standing in this bookstore at the mall, which carries comics. And now you can go to the next slide, if you would, Ken.
Absolutely.
And I immediately see two whole factions arguing. And the show had done this a little bit, right? Destro and Cobra Commander. There are problems in the first two miniseries, right? Cobra Commander and Serpentor in season 2 in 86. But this right here is sort of on a bigger scale because the show hadn't been able to address the Iron Grenadiers, right? We get one animated commercial, which promotes one of the issues, right? When the Iron Grenadiers were coming out, right? We get one animated commercial where Destro goes it alone, as narrator Jackson Beck says.
He's sick of Cobra Commander and Serpentor's,
bickering. Tired of Cobra Commander and Serpentor's constant bickering. Destro goes it alone.
Yes.
Okay, so this is something I haven't seen, right? And then there's this title, Recurring Themes, and this is between 5th and 6th grade for me, and that title looks smart. And Road Pig uses his weapon, which I knew if he had ever shown up in the cartoon wouldn't happen, right? Snake Eyes had basically never used his sword in the cartoon. He carries it in one shot in one episode, doesn't use it. And then the Iron Grenadiers draw their swords, which would not have happened in the cartoon. And so I could tell immediately from these 3 or 4 things happening on the first 2 pages that the comic book was operating by different rules or had different expectations. And I mean, even this first page has a joke, right? That what's this like meeting hall that they're in, the cryptic order of the benevolent reptile, right? Like folks, Larry Hama has a sense of humor, and this is a Cobra town, and it's always been a little unclear to me what percentage of the people who live there know it's a Cobra town, are okay that it's a Cobra town, or are brainwashed and okay it's a Cobra town, right? You have different versions. You have Springfield, you have Broca Beach, you have Millville, right? In Millville, they're specifically brainwashing everyone. But in the same way that Arbco is really funny.
Yes.
Right? It's like, it's just an anagram and we get the joke. And it's not that the Joes aren't smart enough. It's that Hama's creating a little sort of logic, like a little eddy in a river, right? Mm-hmm. Where like, no, this bit of information just isn't going to flow downstream. No one will actually know. No one will figure out that Arbco is just Cobra.
Yeah.
And it happens here again with whatever this is, the cryptic order of the benevolent reptile, like Memorial Hall, right? Like
Yes.
Snakeville, bad guys town. Oh, it's right. And even in the second panel, right? The one more small act of violence. The Iron Grenadier kicks Zorana in the face down the stairs, right?
Yes.
Like this would not happen in the show.
Yes, and Road Pig just goes buck wild here. It's just like, you dare touch Zorana, because he was so fascinated with her in the comic.
And
right? Kind of becomes this thing.
Yes, right. And something that I miss from from all issues of G.I. Joe after Marvel are that they're no longer switching back and forth for Road Pig between lowercase, mixed case, and only uppercase when he switches between his two personalities. And so the effect of him switching sort of isn't clear anymore. But right. Okay. So I was standing in this bookstore at the mall and I'm flipping through this comic and I'm sort of getting convinced that I should buy it. And I showed it to my brother and he said, it's $1. Don't buy it. And what he was saying was, no, $3 is another G.I. Joe figure.
Oh.
Like $1 was not a lot, but relatively that was a lot. And I'm glad I didn't listen to him. And that feels very different from comics now, which are $4 and $5 and $6. Or you wait for the graphic novel, which is 15 or 20. And now it's a different world with video games, and things are more expensive. And comics weren't disposable in 1989, but it's certainly closer to this like 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s thing that they're really cheap, and you don't necessarily keep them forever.
Yep. I remember 75 cents at a newsstand was like a real thing, and I'd pay $1 Canadian to buy them. You know what I mean? And that was even before. Yeah. So, and eventually they became $1. So, yeah. So this is kind of a cool dynamic, as you're saying, because I see now why you picked it, because you would not have seen this in the cartoon, right? I can see now what you like about this. Because I wondered as well. I was like, is there a reason he's picking this? But he'll tell me, and I'll save the suspense.
It's also funny. I think if I had gotten to that bookstore 3 or 4 weeks earlier and pulled out issue 89, which was also Mark Bright, I think the first page of that is Buzzer in the swimming pool of money. I think I might have had different but analogous reactions and bought the comic and then been on a similar life path. I think if I had gotten to this bookstore 3 or 4 weeks later and picked up issue 91, right, which has this amazing but kind of ugly first page of Zartan having just been beaten up and holding like a piece of wood with a rusty nail in it, right? And this is a Tony Salmons fill-in issue, because Mark Bright at the time was drawing both G.I. Joe and Green Lantern in Action Comics, or by then he'd switched over to drawing the Emerald Dawn miniseries. But at this point, Mark Bright's drawing like 1.5 books a month, maybe 2. And so he misses a couple of G.I. Joe issues. And as I've said, as Mark and I say a lot on Talking Joe, G.I. Joe is a hard comic to draw. But I think if characters, vehicles, very specific costumes, and drawing all these vehicles in perspective, right? And then Hama is a demanding writer because he has like specific, he puts you through your choreography paces. But I think if I'd shown up 3 or 4 weeks later and bought issue 91, I might not have been grabbed the same way, because issue 91, now I appreciate it. At the time, I did not appreciate Tony Salmon's art.
Well, I am impressed by your photographic memory about what happens on what panel and what happens on what page. So now I'm like, oh, I got to remember what was in the opening part of issue 91 or Buzzer in issue 89. But nevertheless, we get another slight time jump here, and we're now jumping into the Ninja Force days. We're into issue 119, where we've now got this robot Snake Eyes fighting Snake Eyes. And I don't know how specific you were in this, but I do think you were referring to the fight between the two.
It's more sort of the general issue. So what's fascinating about this comic to me is 2 things. It's a fill-in by Herb Trimpe, right? So Trimpe had last drawn issue 99, and then right around then he had finished up special missions, right? Out of the 29 issues of special missions, I think Trimpe draws 25 of them, 26 of them. So he's very much part of the G.I. Joe comics universe. But when this issue 119 comes out, he had not been for 2 years, although he drew some of the trading cards. So I guess my timeline is not as consistent as I think.
That's all right.
But also he writes this issue, and people, maybe it's only 17 of us, but people who pay a lot of attention to G.I. Joe comics, or people who pay a lot of attention to Larry Hama, I think we're really aware that out of the 155 issues of Marvel G.I. Joe, Hama wrote like all but 5 of them, 4 or 5 or 6, right?
And some near the end, especially. Yeah.
There are those 2 fill-ins at the end, which they've been sitting on for a while. They're the 2 Stephen Grant issues, 3 Stephen Grant issues, 2 Stephen Grant issues at the beginning, in the first 2 years. And then there's this one. And I feel like this issue kind of gets forgotten because it's right after a 3-parter where Rod Wiggum comes back and Michael Golden comes back to do some covers. It's a great 3-parter. And this is right before Wildman's arc, or Wildman's run, Andrew Wildman's run starts. And you get that very cool cover for 120 with the ninjas, in the sort of mountains looking at Destro's castle. And there's this really, really strong diagonal, like the camera's totally tilted looking at that. And that first issue with Wildman, Hama's he's just on, right? Like Baroness punches Cobra Commander in the nuts, and Cobra Commander's got his new costume, and there's too many ninjas, and it's very exciting, right? And then right here, you get this issue that stands out in such a weird way. So Trimpe writes it and pencils it. And I forget if he inks it. But then you've got this trope, the double, it's like Superman's fighting himself in Superman 3, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And it carries on for several panels, right?
And the cover really leans into it. And the issue is not as exciting as the cover sort of teases or promises. This is a good cover. This is not the most exciting cover. I think, a different sort of camera angle. I mean, although the camera has to be looking down because you have to see Scarlet on the ground. If you're looking up, you're not going to see her. If the camera's on the ground, you might see some of her. All right. So anyway, this cover feels a little bit like the idea was like someone's first idea and someone said, yeah, do that. Right. And sort of the concept of the issue, it's like, we're running behind. Like, Trimpe, do an issue. Okay. And Trimpe had already written, folks, don't forget, Trimpe had already written, oh, that's right. Okay. Besides the 2 fill-ins at the end, the 2 Stephen Grant issues at the beginning, and this Trimpe issue, Trimpe also writes issue, I think it's 8. So Trimpe had written and he plotted 2 issues. Trimpe had written G.I. Joe before, right? And it's okay. The reason why it's in one sentence, the reason why I think this issue is so interesting, and I'm not trying to speak ill of Trimpe's writing abilities, but I think we'd all agree that Larry Hama is the correct writer for G.I. Joe. And
he's still doing it, right? So.
Yes. And, Trimpe's written some comics, but, we really want to see him as a penciler, his long run on Hulk and all this G.I. Joe stuff. This comic to me is an example of what G.I. Joe might have been if Larry Hama hadn't been involved. It would have been fine.
But it would have been very different because you're right. It hits those tropes. Look at the way the Snake Eyes and the clone Snake Eyes are basically mirror imaged of each other. It's kind of a quirkiness to it, right? And it kind of ends with this, like, okay, so Storm Shadow pretends to threaten Scarlet, and that's how he finds who the real Snake Eyes is, and then the robot gets blasted. It's a little bit cliche.
I think in terms of the mechanics of writing, that's good work. If we've seen it before, if it's not fresh and exciting, that's a disappointment. But Hama has such a particular, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Hama's work and reading it, and we're friends, so sometimes we have
Oh,
lunch
good.
when I go to New York. Um, and I think because Hama on panels sometimes speaks really matter of factly, and I think sometimes when folks meet him at a convention at his table and get an autograph or a sketch, he's sort of matter of fact, right? Because conventions are loud and they're tiring,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and
absolutely.
and sometimes someone's like, "Oh, can you draw like Laura Kenny?" And he's like, "I don't know who that is." And he's not
Yeah,
saying, "I don't know who that is. That's a bad request. I don't care. Get out of here." He's just saying, "I don't know who that is." It's like, "Oh, okay, it's Wolverine's clone. You know, she's got 3 claws or whatever." Um,
right.
and I think sometimes his sort of bedside manner, the like matter of factness, belies the fact that he's got a real sense of humor, right?
Mm,
It's like sometimes on panels, he's telling a story and he's chuckling, and
mm.
it's really fun to hear a like funny Larry Hama story. And um, so there's so much of this sort of there's a there's occasionally a nice dose of like wry, impish Larry Hama humor in
Hmm.
the G.I. Joe comic. The point of view that he has for these soldiers, right? It's like this comic, like we've never in the G.I. Joe comic, we've never cut to like the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the president. It's just about the Joes, and they often
Yeah,
get sent on hard missions, and they don't have backup, or they don't get a flight
yeah,
home,
yeah,
and then like he does his research with in terms of weapons and like helicopters and the joysticks in airplanes and stuff. And there's a specificity in GI Joe that I think we've gotten so used to. We're only aware of it when we I'm only aware of it when I read GI Joe comics not by Hama, and I'm really paying attention, and they like sort of like get something wrong, right? Not that I know how this like one airplane rotates versus another, but
hmm,
so here is a like perfectly good Marvel comic. It's an action comic. It's a GI Joe comic. It's definitely not a Larry Hama comic.
that's fair. And you know what? It's funny because like he always made a joke. You talk about the humor. He said something on the toys that made us something like nobody works on like a comic book toy unless you're like a total loser or something like that. And he kind of chuckles that off because like, and we're like, yeah, but that was the most epic run ever that
Well,
you did.
at the time, right? If you were writing a toy tie-in comic, the toy was going to last 2 years, and then you were out of a job.
Mm,
And at Marvel, um, like Shogun Warriors. I mean, Star Wars was in terms of licensed books at Marvel, right? Battlestar
right,
Galactica, Godzilla. Godzilla didn't last very long. Shogun Warriors didn't last very long. Star Wars did, but that's a crazy exception, and that's not about the toy. That's about the movies.
right.
Um, like so, and Hama was already doing as editor at Marvel. Hama's already doing things that weren't in the regular Marvel superhero universe, right?
Right.
Like he was about to edit Conan, and he had been editing Crazy, which is Marvel's version of Mad Magazine. And you have to have a sense of humor to edit something like Mad Magazine, because all your every story has to be funny. So I like this issue as a comparison, and as a 22-page yarn, it's perfectly fun.
Yeah, and you know what? We talk about non-Hama comics. I'd love to have a further discussion one day. Obviously, not today, but like Brandon Jirwa and Josh Blaylock and what they did on Devil's Due would be definitely something. Almost comparing to the Hama style would almost make a good side topic. So,
Mm.
yeah. So that was issue 119. We then go to issue 138. But I think what you wanted to talk about here is the way issue 138 ends, because I know I don't talk about Transformers as much as I used to on this channel. That's why I took the time to point out that blaster that's behind me, right? But it's the revelation of Megatron at the end of the issue. And I was like, Tim, I'm so glad you picked this one.
Okay, so I'm writing a GI Joe history book, and I go to GI Joe conventions, and I co-host a GI Joe podcast, and we're talking about GI Joe. But I'm also a big Transformers fan, and um, and I was so taken with the final year of Marvel's Transformers by Simon Furman and Andrew Wildman and Stephen Baskerville and Nell Yontop, who colored every issue of Marvel Transformers. And Rick Parker. Rick Parker was lettering that book at the end, I think. So issue 75 of Transformers comes out, and Unicron shows up, and it's double-sized, and it's amazing. And in the letters page of 75 or 76, someone says, I hope you guys stick around. And the editor says, if it's up to us, we'd be here till issue 200. At the same time, we sure could use your support, right? And it's never a good sign when the editor in the letters page says, write letters, get your friends to buy the comic. 2 or 3 issues later in the letters page, they say, oh, by the way, next issue is our final issue. Furman and Wildman had a loose plot, or an idea, I should say a notion, not a plot, that an idea about what they would do from issue 76 to 100. And they couldn't do it because suddenly they only had 5 issues or 4 issues to wrap up everything, right? So someone dies in issue 75, it's amazing, and they come back, it's great, but it's really rushed. In issue 80, that was gonna wait till issue 100. A version of the story got told at IDW in the very good Transformers Regeneration 1 maxi series, which ran 22 issues, because there's a free comic book day issue, and then there's a 0 issue. And the 0 issue you have to read between, like, I forget, 92 and 93 or something. I think they did that partly so that, like, Dinobot month would be lined up with, like, every Transformers comic that IDW was doing. Anyway, at the end of the Furman and Wildman Transformers run, we don't know what happens to a bunch of Decepticons or the Ark, right? It's like, oh, did that crash land in Canada, or is that like in a lake? Like, where'd Galvatron go? I think we don't talk about Galvatron. And Hama had not written the 4-issue G.I. Joe and the Transformers miniseries. That was written by Michael Higgins. And I think a not as well-known fact is that Michael Higgins at the time was the assistant editor on Transformers. Assistant editors weren't getting credit at that time. And that's an okay miniseries. It's definitely not a Larry Hama G.I. Joe story. And you can sort of take it or leave it for Transformers continuity. You can definitely leave it for G.I. Joe continuity. But Hasbro's going to bring the Transformers toys back, right? Because they had never...
Generation 2, yeah.
Yes, they had not faded in Japan or the UK or Europe, but they were going to take a couple years off in the States, and then they sort of accelerated the timeline. It's like, we're bringing them back immediately. And there's this toy. The toys arrive early at Toys R Us or KB in November of '92, and then the toys arrive everywhere in spring of '93. Okay, yeah. So Hama has to put Transformers in G.I. Joe for a couple issues to sort of spin off the Generation 2 comic, and Furman comes back, and it's great. And so I was so excited by this page because I don't think I knew this was happening. I don't think I knew. I think I knew there was a Transformers comic coming. I don't think I knew they were going to show up in G.I. Joe. And so I turn this page, and I'm totally blown away. But there's a couple things happening here. One, it's Transformers drawn by Andrew Wildman and Stephen Baskerville, the team that had done the final year of the Marvel run, right? 2, it is a bonkers ending to the 4-part ninja story where, because Destro's castle can reconfigure itself, right? I mean, you learn this in the next couple of pages in the next issue. This giant metal man from space sees that and says, hey, that thing's mechanical and moving around. I'm mechanical and I reconfigure. I should go see what that is. But then Hama ends on a joke, right? Because Cobra Commander thinks very highly of himself, right? He's a terrorist. He's a liberator. He makes deals, right? And if a giant space alien robot who I had sort of met before, but we're not going to talk about it, I'd never met before, like landed in front of me and yells at me, I would not say, listen, can we talk? I would just cower.
Right. That's what makes Cobra Commander, because he's a lunatic, right? So that's kind of played out in the comics quite heavily. And it's interesting, as you mentioned the next issue here. And I remember I know you said they dropped at the end of 92 there, because a lot of times back then, especially, you would have something advertised as 93, but it might get there for Christmas season of 92. That's just something that seemed to happen with toys back in the day. But I remember being, 11 years old, almost 11 years old, and getting the tank version of, or at least, sorry, no, I didn't get the tank version of Megatron. I got a bunch of G2 Transformers, but I never got the tank of Megatron, which is kind of what's advertised here. You can kind of see the green on his shoulder. But you specifically wanted to call out the double splash page on this. I had a hard time lining those two pages up, because I screenshotted them and I tried to line them up perfectly. And it's like, oh, he really wants this page. I'm going to let him talk about it.
Thank you for the work. Can you just go back 2 slides? I just want to point out one more great thing that Wildman is doing here.
Sure.
These 3 really well composed panels that are very narrow vertical panels, right?
Yes.
And it might be that the height of Megatron or the height discrepancy sort of demands a penciler to do that. But I bet if you got a room full of like 20-year-olds who've drawn comics and are trying to break into comics, right? And you gave them all a piece of paper and you're like, okay, 3 panels, giant robot has just landed in front of a castle and Cobra Commander says, listen, can we talk? I bet none of them would do 3 vertical panels. I think some of them would do 1 and some of them would do a combination of horizontal panels. So I just want to call out the interesting work that Wildman's doing here.
This is why you're here, because you'll notice perspectives and things like that, whereas I would have just thought maybe they're restricted on space. Well, if you're restricted on space, you could do them horizontally, right? But you pointed this out, which is, again, I knew I asked the right guy to come on when I sort of asked for these insights.
All right, so Chris Batista is going to do 4 issues, and he only does 2. And he leaves the book before the arc is over, which is a real bummer, because his stuff is warm and just agrees with what Wildman had been doing and what like Mark Bright had been doing. Batista's stuff is like a tiny bit slicker, a tiny bit cartoonier, but his stuff feels like Marvel Comics. But this issue has 4 inkers, and a comic, a Marvel comic in the 80s or 90s is in trouble schedule-wise if it has 4 inkers, because while I'm inking 1 page, right, I'm going to ink pages 1, 2, and 3, and Ken, you're going to ink pages 4, 5, and 6, right? It's like maybe
you're rolling the dice on consistency at that point.
Yeah, and so. Okay, and then the other thing that jumps out here is G.I. Joe didn't do a lot of double-page splashes. It started to do more of them after issue 100 or 110. But, Hama is a pretty efficient storyteller, and it's a team book, right? You have to use sort of every inch, right? Just to make a tiny diversion, digression, right? You mentioned Batman recently, and there's a version of Batman that's really popular this past year, right? Absolute Batman. And I read a couple issues recently, and it's drawn by Nick Dragotta, and there are some pages. It's like issue 9, maybe. There's a page with like 18 panels. It's just like tiny square panel of someone's fist, tiny square panel of someone's boot, tiny square panel of like a shoulder, and then a larger panel that's still kind of small of like Batman climbing a ladder.
Hollywood squares and then Hollywood squares again.
But it's not a grid. It's more sort of broken up.
Oh, okay.
But at the same time, this is a double page splash, but it also kind of works like a single page splash next to a single page splash, because one's Megatron and one's the castle. But Hama might know that he needs to give a double page splash because there's a giant space robot here, and that's big, and you need to be able to show a sense of scale. And B, Hama might be reacting to sort of the style of the day, which is, Image Comics and like more splash pages and pages that are more like pinups and less like, traditional storytelling. And Image didn't invent that. It's like guys like McFarlane and Jim Lee sort of developed that at Marvel a few years earlier. But the crazy reveal and tease of the final page of the previous issue is, doubled down and put into afterburners here, because this isn't like Megatron here is sort of he's all scratched up and cracked, but he's not like falling apart quite the way that Wildman drew it. Mm-hmm. And for the second half of Wildman's run, he was not doing full pencils. He was doing breakdowns.
Right.
First half of Wildman's run is inked by Randy Emerlin. Looks great. Second half of Wildman's run, he's not spending as much time on these issues because he's drawing another book. And Stephen Baskerville, his inker from Transformers, does finishes. And if you go back 2 slides, the sort of scratchiness of it, like Baskerville is inking kind of like Rob Liefeld, right? Like you look at those lines on the very top right, where the white becomes the gray on Megatron's head, just below the like exclamation mark of not a Decepticon. Or you look at the like zigzag in the middle of the page on that sort of light purple on Megatron's leg. Okay, so you can go forward 2 again. And I like Wildman's art more in the first half of his run than in the second half, right? I wanted him to spend more time on the book. He's drawing 2 books at a time. And I want Baskerville to ink like he used to, and he's inking very differently now, just, 2 years later, 3 years later. And so this double page splash is this sort of combination of things. It's like, oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite Transformers. Oh man, giant space aliens are in G.I. Joe. That's weird. Oh man, Megatron is going to totally destroy Destro's castle. Megatron looks so good. Although the inking's kind of scratchy on him. Like, oh, well, maybe those other 3 inkers will clean things up when we get to page 8. Oh man, all these inkers. This book was done in a rush.
Yep. But again, you'll observe things that most people won't, right? For me, it's just sort of like, oh, they're introducing Generation 2. I didn't even stop to think about the multiple inkers on this until you mentioned it. But now it all kind of ties together and makes sense, right? Like it's making me want to go back and, after I'll probably listen to this at least while I'm driving and then upload this and then go back and be like, damn, I didn't notice that. Damn, I didn't notice that. And I'm going to end up reading the Skybound reprint a second time, which, so soon after the first one. And we got the Transformers one that's coming out right now. So, wow. But, it does have that signature Megatron pose with the fusion cannon. Like, that is him to a T.
Although that is on the incorrect arm.
Oh, my God, it is. It is on the left and not the right.
I mean, in the movie, in the animated movie, when he and Prime are fighting, he takes it off so he can fight Prime hand to hand. So
yeah,
I think there'd been one episode, season 1, where it's just on the wrong arm, like an animation mistake, a storyboarding mistake. So I don't think it's that he can't, it's that he almost never does.
Right. Yeah. Right. Maybe just shoots better with the right side. I know on the toy, you can really only slide it on the right side. So that's that. But so we're going to jump past the Transformer stuff, even though that could be a topic on its own. There's so many of these that could be a topic on its own. Like you said, how many podcasts do you and Mark have with the silent interlude alone? And yeah, so we jump to kind of towards the end of the run here. We're 10 issues from the end of the run with issue 145. But there's a lot that happens here, and I'm not sure how specific you were. I don't think you were too specific about this issue. I think, but one of the things that happens, and we haven't talked about them yet, is the White Clown and Magda from the Barovia story arc, because this kind of wraps up their story arc in an inglorious fashion. Spoiler alerts. But like I kind of dismissed them when I first read them, and then they kind of kept coming back and coming back. I don't know if you wanted to talk about this or if you wanted to talk about something else in this specific issue.
We can talk about these characters. I'll take a step back and speak broadly about Hama's use of these non-player characters, these sort of supporting characters that aren't Joes or Cobras, that don't get action figures. Quinn and Bongo the Bear got in memoriam pages in Order of Battle, and so did Softmaster, right?
Softmaster or the Softmaster,
and
he absolutely
that might be an issue of publishing. It's like, well, we got 3 more pages. What are we going to do with them?
Yeah.
We don't have any more Joes or
Yeah.
vehicles.
I'm trying to remember if it was Blind Master or Soft Master, but I think you're right. It was Soft Master. So it was Soft Master.
Blind Master wasn't dead yet because he's in the alley fight with Zartan in 89 and 91.
Oh, he is. You're right. Order of Battle was written early.
Yeah, right. Order of Battle's 87.
Yes.
Okay, so Hama's got these fictional countries that are stand-ins for real countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Barovia is Germany, although it's sort of a combination. Some of these are combinations, and when we see Quinn come back a second time, when the White Clown and Magda are such an important part of those issues in the 60s. I think we sort of assume that we'll never see them again because
the 60s issues, not the 1960s.
Correct.
I just want to make sure people get that. This
the number
coincide with the 12-inch GI Joe at all.
Right. The Marvel numbered 60s.
Yes.
And so I think I assumed we wouldn't see them again, right? Because it's not that they're one-offs, it's that sort of they've done narratively what they need to do, right? They help the Joes and then the Joes get out. And then the Joes and us, the readers, can feel bad for their plight. It's like, well, we're stuck in a communist country, but at least we've got the circus. And but Hama's keeping up. The book has this sort of funny timeline where it's always now, and the characters aren't really aging, but a few of them age. Like Don Marino went from being a teenager to being old enough to join the Joe team in, like a year's worth of issues.
Right.
But Bart and Lisa Simpson are forever in whatever it is, 4th grade and 5th grade, right? And yet there've been like 30 Christmas episodes of The Simpsons, and
Maggie's older than many of the fans who watch her, and yet she's still a baby. So
yes, and I'm fine with all these inconsistencies, but in the real world, the Berlin Wall falls and communism recedes, and democracy comes to much of Europe, and so Hama has an opportunity to check in with these characters, if he wants, and but also he can be sort of cynical. He can comment, right? Like, look at that word balloon on the left, right? With Cobra's help, my hardline party will restore purity to Barovia. Like, oh no, that's not good. We had assumed if we were going to check in with them that things were going well, but if you team up with Cobra, you might invade a small Middle Eastern country for its oil, in an analog to a real life invasion. So the thing in broad strokes that is so striking to me about this issue is that there's a new artist after a couple issues of fill-ins and musical chairs artists.
Mm-hmm.
And in those 145 new artists, right? Phil Gozier shows up and he draws the rest of the series, minus those 2 fill-ins that have been sitting around for years. And his stuff is he's newer to comics, so he's not as technically proficient as like a Herb Trimpe, who'd been already drawing comics for like 15 years, 20 years before G.I. Joe. Gozier isn't even as technically proficient at this point in the like very specific mechanics of drawing comics as a Ron Wagner, who was very new to comics when he started drawing G.I. Joe. Right? Ron Wagner got out of school and draws for DC for a little while. I don't know, like 6 months or a year, and then gets work from Marvel for 6 years. Gozier is also drawing in a more modern style. There's some Todd McFarlane in him, right? His faces are a little cartoony, and his anatomy is a little stretched, a little exaggerated. And so I was aware that like this is a comic that was no longer getting the best artists, right? Now, technically, maybe it had never gotten the best artists because it's a licensed book. And if you draw a licensed book for Marvel in the 80s, you don't get paid as much because some of that money,
licensing fees,
some of that money goes to licensing. Although if the book sells really well, and it did, you get royalties. You get more royalties than if you drew something else for Marvel.
Right.
So
it offsets it. Yeah.
I'm sort of aware of this duality. Like, okay, we've got them some consistency. I really like this new guy's stuff. He's going to get better. It does feel very modern. You know, like Trimpe, when Trimpe draws G.I. Joe 1 and 3, it feels not old fashioned, but it feels classic, right? It's like, no, Trimpe's drawing like Kirby, right? And Kirby's drawing comics in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And he said as he hit his microphone by accident. So there's all this funny mix happening in this issue because we check in on some characters and themes that we haven't seen in a while, right? We see the White Clown and Magda. We go to Barovia. We have a scene at Arlington, which we've done once or twice before, and they're really powerful. And I did not know in 1993 when reading this issue that Hama had been in the army.
Yeah.
I just knew that he seemed to know his stuff. And hey, look, there's a word that go back. There's a wordless panel. There's actually maybe two. There's a wordless panel, or it's wordless the way that it's cropped right here, right? And you know, how many times have we seen a character cry in G.I. Joe?
You just don't.
How many times in a Marvel comic do you see a man? Do you see a man cry? Right?
Yeah.
Not very often.
Not very often. Yeah.
And
it was especially back then, right? I mean, this is 1994, so it's 94, 93, maybe 94. Beginning of 94. So yeah. Yeah, and you know they visit Arlington. To me, this is just a really powerful scene. So when you mentioned 145, I was just like, this is a good way to do the whole in memoriam thing without, you know, because by this point, like you said, Order of Battle had already been written, right? So yeah.
In addition to this sort of new artist who's good, not the best, but you know, gonna get better. This final run of issues, I feel like it's the same with colors and letters. You have young people who are new to comics. Who are, you know, like, this is not Rick Parker lettering this book, right?
Right. You're getting introduced to a generation of new talent, supposedly.
So this issue comes after this, like, fun but really inconsistent 4 issues with Transformers, and then 144 is this really powerful flashback issue, and it's like, get that guy, but like that guy's doesn't take over the book. That guy's really young too. This is the guy who gets the book. And it felt like when 145 came out, can you go back to the cover?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And sorry, was 144 the flashback Scarlet issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was right. Cause I remember that one being a really, really great issue.
So this cover, it's like, okay, they're about to drop the, how many more months does the Snake Eyes? Okay. Anyway, I'll skip that part. This cover feels sort of representative because it's a good cover. It could be drawn. The drawing could be a little stronger, right? It's like Mindbender sort of disappears with the helicopters in front of him. But this idea that you have this like looming figure over this, you know, tiny city, but it's not a model. It's not a computer hologram. It's a montage cover. So you've got Cobra Commander in a very Cobra Commander pose, right? That feels sort of timeless, right? You've got Mindbender, who is sort of at this point an old character, but then behind them you've got new characters. You've got these, are they Toxo Vipers or are they miscolored 93 Vipers? I think they're miscolored 93 Vipers, and I've never liked that figure because it doesn't look like a Viper. It looks like an underwater Viper or a like toxic gas Viper. Good figure, just it's undercolored and underdesigned. But anyway, and then you've got this lettering, which is good, but it's a tiny bit. It's not as strong as some of the lettering on like earlier issues. They're still doing the Snake Eyes thing for the logo. So you have this combination on this cover, and the art is drawn by the new guy, right? So you have this combination, which is some things that you remember, the old things that are great, and then some new things.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, please stabilize for the next run of issues because it's about to be the 30th anniversary and the last 4 or 5 months were really choppy, right? You had
Right.
like space robots
Mm-hmm.
and like 17 artists through those 4 issues.
Yeah.
So this cover felt like a promise. And that final run of 10 issues, minus those two fascinating fill-ins, even though the Joes go to space, even though a bunch of stories were snipped off and never resolved, right? And you
Speaking
get
of
the
space, I did catch that panel. So
um, but it's like hey, instead of promoting the giant space alien robots for that other toy line, like no, let's give Star Brigade a chance. I don't really want the
exactly.
Joes to go to space, but they'd already been to space. Like the cover
In
of 60,
87.
the
Yeah.
cover of issue 65, right?
Yep.
With I guess
Defiant or
that's Payload.
Payload. Yeah. And just to
Um,
clarify for anybody who's really finicky on the timeline, it was 143 that was the Scarlet flashback issue. I had to check that because I actually included that in my history of GI Joe 93, and that would have been December 93 when she did that. Anyway, just while I was looking at my phone a second ago, I was like, no, it wasn't 94, it was 93, because I'm very finicky about what happened in 94 and what happened in 93 on my history year by year series. So
no,
anyway,
thank you,
it's
thank you
minor.
for the
It's
fact.
minor, but you would have you like your timeline, so I figured I would at least issue not so much that correction, but that clarification, because
No, thank
yeah.
you for the fact check. I don't want to get any issue numbers or artist credits or dates
It's just because the years
wrong.
switched between it was December 93 and then January 94. So that was just happening that pivot point between years. If it would all happen in the same year, I wouldn't have said anything. So yeah.
This is also a fun panel because it's not that often that. Oh, I know what this is. This is that shot from The Right Stuff, right? So from the movie.
Oh.
Okay, so
Oh.
like, and this shot is in GI Joe Retaliation. This shot is in Armageddon. This doesn't have to be movies where people go to space, but that badass slow motion thing where
Yes.
most of your lead characters in a movie
Yes.
like round a corner
Armageddon, they're marching to the shuttle
and
kind of thing.
walk
Yeah.
toward you in slow motion. Like that all comes
Yes.
from The Right Stuff, right? Which is a movie based on a book.
Yes.
And right, this isn't just like a comic book pinup panel or page where you get to see the heroes all geared up in their costumes unobstructed. They're astronauts, so it's a reference, right? Okay, well, good job, Larry. That's probably a Larry Hama idea.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you for all that. This actually takes us to the end of sort of that slideshow that I had at least prepped as far as this is concerned. I did want to give a shout out because I mentioned to you that I loved issue 155 because of the eventual Kamakura character, Sean Collins, writing to Snake Eyes and them sort of forming a bond and it sort of being the final issue. But that was sort of my selection. That wasn't so much your selection on that, because that issue ended up meaning a lot to me. Because for me personally, getting into the Devil's Due run, I had kind of thought, okay, where's the tie into Sean Collins? And there it was right there. I hadn't read that issue until recently. But man, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but because I've not brought this level of comic insight to the channel before, and I realized after 4.5 years of running the channel, I was like, I think it's time to have a discussion like this. And you've once again proven that I went to the right person to kind of just roll the dice. I'm like you said, we didn't really know each other before this. We had a few passing conversations on Messenger. We shook hands, I think, briefly at Joe Fest 24, and now you've noticed a lot of things. Like you've noticed, like you got a photographic memory of the pencilers to when they changed. Inkers to what issues specifically were not by Hama to the trends that they set before they jumped on GI Joe and things they did after and references back to Jack Kirby's style and all that. So I really do want to thank you for all of that amazing insight, right? In addition to writing your blog, in addition to having a comics related podcast, in addition to, I guess I've not been to your store, but I guess I have been to Boston, that area. And keeping the love of walk-in brick and mortar stores alive and running it through a sense of passion and not just putting somebody at the counter to kind of be a bean counter, for lack of a better term.
Thanks. This has been great, Ken.
Yeah. So were there any like closing thoughts you wanted to throw out there as far as the comic is concerned, or anything out there? Any last plugs or?
We can plug those 3 things that I do with those slides from the beginning of the episode.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, in a very general sense, I love comics. I love the art form. I like reading. I'm a reader, and the G.I. Joe comics bring several of my favorite things together: reading, stories, art, and G.I. Joe. And if you like this kind of talk, folks, the actual website for Talking Joe is talkingjoe.co.uk, and that has links to all of the podcast platforms where episodes are posted. Right, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, and about half our episodes are video. So YouTube is the place for that. But Mark, host Mark, very thoughtfully takes our episodes and edits out all of the uhs and ums, particularly when we do a video episode live, and then puts an audio only version of that on YouTube and then the audio podcast channels. So sometimes it's fun or important to see what page or panel we're talking about. Sometimes we're interviewing someone and we'll say, "What's behind you?" Sometimes we're just talking about comics, and we'll be specific. We'll say, okay, on page 5, panel 4, if you're reading along. So if you like this level of discussion about comics and G.I. Joe comics, give Talking Joe a try. I should be at Assembly Required in November 2025.
In Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa.
In Des Moines, Iowa. So say hello. If you like G.I. Joe comics, Larry Hama is scheduled to be there. Ron Wagner is scheduled to be there. And Phil Hester, who wrote and drew one of the wordless Silent Missions issues a few months ago. He got his own issue of G.I. Joe, the one with Beachhead. He's scheduled to be there, plus Ron Rudat.
Awesome.
But come to my blog, read about stuff, buy my book in 2 years or whatever, and maybe I'll see you at my store. Thanks, Ken.
Awesome. Well, I guess we'll close it out right there. And thank you for all you did here. I'm going to try to play my outro for the first time, because until yesterday, I didn't have one. So let's see how it rolls.